Hey guys, it's Zach back with another review in a weird mood. I'm going to do a top-down mouse review. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you like my standard camera angle? Do you like a top-down mouse review? Guess we'll find out. This is the MCHOSE G7 Max, a mouse I've had for a long time and have taken way too long to review, probably because it's just not the shape for me. It's sort of like a G502, sort of like a Razer Basilisk, but it does unfortunately only have the two side buttons. This Max version, though, does have much higher specs than the original G7 and G7 Pro, which in my opinion does make it more worth checking out. It comes in at sub $50 if you can find it. It is sold out on their site right now. Maybe able to find one on like AliExpress. Has wireless up to 8K, TTC V2 opticals, which is a nice optical switch I'm a huge fan of. A $33.95 TTC Gold encoder, comes in right around 60 grams, does have an 800 milliamp hour battery, which I'm usually a critic of, but for people who use mice in this shape, they have very heavy mice, and this coming in at this weight honestly isn't terrible against the competitors for what it's worth. So let's get into the actual implementation. That's really far away. I don't know if I like that. Anyway, the TTC V2 opticals in this feel pretty decent. There's minimal side-to-side play here on the buttons, some nice comfort grooves as you can see through the middle of the left button, but the right one completely flat and rounded. Probably about a medium actuation, a little bit cheaper and more plasticky feeling than the very good ROM implementation of these, but honestly, a definite improvement from the Huano 60Ms they had in these other mice, better than Omron 100Ms for sure. A little bit more of a mechanical feel to these than the TTC V2s I've felt in other mice, but overall, for this mouse at this price, I'm pretty pleased with the clicks. The scroll wheel here you can see a little bit on the larger side, nice rubber there, steps are defined, but also on the lighter side, not very heavy, and the click is extremely spammable, a very satisfying scroll wheel. Coming to the side buttons here, they protrude very nicely. There's just a little bit of pre-travel, not much post-travel. They rebound pretty well. They're not my favorite side buttons. I do like that they protrude. They are pretty centrally located. Obviously, on a mouse like this, though, you probably would want like at least a third button here, if not like a whole array of those G502 buttons. But again, only these two side buttons. But for what it's worth, unlike most mice, my thumb actually sits right between the center of these two side buttons, which is kind of nice. Coming to the bottom of the mouse here, the sensor is actually pretty centered as far as the tips of the clicks go, but a little bit further forward as far as just the general vicinity of how it feels. I think that makes sense here. Bluetooth on a mouse like this. A lot of weird random skates. The skates themselves on this free-for-all SV control, definitely on the more controlled side. Very much not like a Jade, not even as fast as an Obsidian. A slower stock skate. They are nicely rounded. They're not super thick. They get the job done, but they're just not my favorite. I have, however, seen worse. And of course, some dongle storage here, should you want to use it, and your DPI switching button. As far as build integrity, there's a little bit of flex here if you press hard on the sides. Nothing on the top shell, really, nothing around the main clicks, even a little tiny bit on the bottom. So overall, the build integrity, definitely satisfactory. And then the coating, it's just completely bare plastic. It's that ping pong ball feel. There's really no coating at all. So in that way, that's a bit of a detractor. Honestly, if you put a coating on this and made it $5 more even, I think a majority of people in the world would be okay with that. Hard to really justify a mouse in the $50 range without a coating, in my opinion, but with the weird shape does sort of lock it into my grip for what it's worth without a coating. So overall, implementation wise, the clicks are actually pretty satisfying, pretty decent rebound, not like an Omron optical, but no complaints. Solid scroll, side buttons, a little bit slow on the skates, but overall not bad at all. Again, for $50, if you're looking for this shape wirelessly with 8K polling in a more tenable weight, then I think the G7 Max is a decent option, as long as you're not looking for those extra side buttons, of course. Taking a quick here at Eloshapes, you can see how this has like the spirit of like the G502, but very different in a lot of ways. Very similar top profile, a little bit taller in the mid to front of the mouse, 2 millimeters shorter, but all of these mice are super long based on how far forward the clicks go, but not nearly as wide, 4 millimeters less at its widest, but coming in at the same height. You see here the G502 has a lot more front left presence, juts out a bit further here, but also has that weird dip, which is just more normal and rounded here on the G7 Max. And again, even the right side more flared out. It's just a much wider experience you're going to get here on the G502. This is honestly much closer to a Basilisk clone, although the Basilisk, again, also more presence here. There's a stronger like little jut taper on the right side of the G7 Max, much similar length, width, and of course the Basilisk a little bit taller in the back mid hump area, whereas the G7 is actually a little bit taller in the front. So some differences across the board here with these mice. And the Basilisk a little bit more presence here also on the front left, but the click jutting out a little bit more here and the G7 Max in the front. Overall, a mouse like this is actually pretty narrow for the overall size of it. It doesn't work for me because of my my weird tilt grip. It just doesn't really work with this sort of a mouse. I'm not really a fan of this little basin support like ergo foot thing here either, but I know a lot of people are. The Basilisk and the G502, very popular mice. The shape I do think probably restricts you a little bit if you want to reach your ceiling in like Kovacs, but if you're just going for productivity or your standard gaming mouse, like if you're just doing a almost like fingertip loose palm here, the mouse does feel a lot more comfortable. It may just be my whack grip that makes this a little bit less comfortable, because in this configuration it does feel pretty nice. This little jut in here I talked about on Eloshapes does feel nice for my pinky. Makes me feel like I'm pinching it. It does also line my pinky and thumb pretty closely up with the sensor. If you're buying a mouse like this, you've probably already mained the Basilisk, for example, for quite a long time, and you know what it feels like. Take a look at those small differences I pointed out in the Eloshapes comparison, and that should inform you on what you think about the shape. Performance-wise, I didn't really have any issues with this. It didn't stand out as an insanely good wireless implementation with the PixArt MCU, but it wasn't bad either by any means. Just sort of a run-of-the-mill standard mouse, which is what I would expect on a mouse costing this much, and is honestly not a problem in my view. Let's go and take a look at the software, which for some reason for me in their standard web browser, but for this mouse only came in Chinese, but you do obviously see the DPI settings here, and you can have independent XY. Because you can see here, I'm setting it to English before going into the mouse and then seeing it in Chinese. But anyway, you can guess what all these settings are. I was actually playing on 1K hertz most recently. Had all these extra settings off here, 0 to bounce and the lowest LOD, so no problems on that. So again, basic software, not sure why it's coming in Chinese, mostly with motion sync here, but worked just fine. Kind of a weird little bug there. But yeah, I sort of already gave you my overall impressions of the mouse. Again, not a shape for me, but a shape that a lot of people do definitely appreciate. Pretty good performance here. Nice to see 8K pulling at a 3395 on a mouse of this shape with a sub 60 gram weight. Overall, do I recommend this? Sure, it's not my favorite mouse, but if you're like a Basilisk user, you want a lighter weight mouse, you want a good implementation, you want to get it for a sub $50 price, this is definitely a mouse worth picking up. And with that, let's see how much this thing weighs, which is extremely convenient on this top-down mouse angle review. I do feel like I lose something doing this from the side view, so again, let me know in the comments what you thought. But we do get a stock G7 Max here, coming in at a shockingly readable 62.7 grams. So again, not quite under 60 grams, right around 63. I can, of course, pop this little door off. 62.2 grams, just a little bit better. No reason not to play like that. Lighter than the competitors, of course, with a mouse of this similar shape. Odd for me here that I don't have to transition my camera. I can just whip this out and get some nice measurements. With that max width sitting about 74.5 millimeters, tapering down to 57.7 right after that juts in, and a hard to measure, almost 54.1 millimeters here on this like part that sort of tapers at the front. And look at that max hump height coming in around 40.9 millimeters. But that about wraps it up for my thoughts here on the MCHOSE G7 Max. Please subscribe and like if you enjoyed the video. You can follow me on X, @DasherDeck. Check out the MouseCast podcast, as well as my peripheral Discord server. And with that, we'll see you.